My daughter's fiancé raised his glass and told her she was the greatest gift his family had ever received. 30 seconds later, he turned toward his mother and spoke in French. Tomorrow, she stops being a fiancée and becomes Collateral. His mother, Monique, smiled as if he had complimented the wine. Once the bank releases the $2.8 million, the wedding can be delayed. She will be too ashamed to tell anyone what happened. Laura sat beside him, holding his hand. She believed they were discussing the bottle of Bordeaux Philippe Morel had brought to our engagement dinner. None of them knew that before I became a quiet widower with sawdust on his boots, I had spent 9 years installing industrial equipment in Lyon, Toulouse, and Saint-Étienne. I understood every word, but I did not confront them at that table. A translation could warn my daughter. Evidence would save her. My name is Thomas Bennett. I was 69 years old that evening, and for most of my life, people had mistaken silence for simplicity. I owned a small custom woodworking shop outside Charlottesville, Virginia. I built cabinets, restored old staircases, and made dining tables sturdy enough to outlive the families who bought them. It was honest work, but it did not advertise the parts of my life that came before it. Philippe saw calluses on my hands and assumed there had never been a passport in them. Monique heard my slow Virginia accent and concluded I had never understood a language beyond my own. I had learned French at 28, when the machinery company I worked for sent me overseas with a tool case and 6 weeks of vocabulary lessons. 6 weeks became 9 years. I learned the language on factory floors, in train stations, at kitchen tables, and during arguments with engineers who spoke too quickly when they were wrong. By the time I returned home, I could negotiate a contract, understand regional jokes, and recognize the particular politeness people use when they are hiding contempt. My wife, Ellen, used to tease me about keeping that part of myself tucked away. She said I treated fluency like an old wrench, valuable, reliable, and never displayed unless there was a job for it. Ellen had been gone 3 years by the time the Morels sat at my table. Her absence still lived in the house in small, practical places. Her blue gardening gloves remained on a shelf in the mudroom. Her handwritten recipe for apple cake was taped inside a cabinet door. The chair at the end of the table had become mine only because no one could bear to leave it empty forever. Newer daughter, Laura, was 39. She had her mother's patience and none of my talent for hiding what she felt. Ellen had started Bennett Mobility and Rehabilitation after caring for her own mother through a stroke. What began as 2 rented rooms and 3 therapists grew into an outpatient center, serving older patients, injured workers, and people learning to walk again after surgery. Laura studied physical therapy, joined Ellen after graduate school, and eventually took over the center when Ellen became ill. The center was not merely a business to us. Ellen had spent 27 years building it. She knew the names of patients' grandchildren, kept a drawer full of birthday cards, and refused to move into a glossy medical complex because elderly clients trusted the brick building with the maple trees out front. By the time she died, the mortgage had been paid. The property and surrounding commercial land were worth approximately $5.2 million. Laura owned the real estate outright and 82% of the operating company. The remaining shares belonged to 2 senior therapists who had been there nearly from the beginning. Adrian Morel entered Laura's life at a hospital foundation fundraiser 18 months after Ellen's death. He was 42, polished without seeming vain, and attentive without appearing eager. He described himself as an international hotel investment consultant. He remembered details. If Laura mentioned an early staff meeting, coffee appeared at her office. When she talked about Ellen, he never rushed her grief. He visited me in the workshop and asked thoughtful questions about walnut and cherry, as if the answers mattered to him. And that was what made him dangerous. He did not arrive as a villain. He arrived as relief. Laura had spent years caring for her mother, protecting the center, and answering every emergency call. Adrian made her feel that someone else could carry a little weight. He cooked dinner when she worked late. He planned weekends without demanding that she abandon her patients. He sat through a memorial service for Ellen and held Laura's coat afterward while she spoke to former employees. By the time he proposed, I did not see a rescuer. He saw a man who appeared to respect the life my daughter had already built. Niece's parents lived mostly in France, but maintained a condominium in Washington, D.C. Philippe said the Morel family had operated boutique hotels for 3 generations. Monique spoke of their properties in Annecy and Avignon with the calm confidence of someone describing monuments rather than businesses. Their manners were precise. Their gifts were expensive but never gaudy. Each compliment contained just enough restraint to feel sincere. The engagement dinner at my house was supposed to join the families before a small wedding 6 weeks later. Laura had asked me to make coq au vin because Adrian claimed mine was better than his mother's. I suspected he was flattering me, but I cooked it anyway. Philippe brought the Bordeaux. Monique brought a silk scarf she said had reminded her of Ellen, though they had never met. For the first hour, the evening was almost painfully pleasant. Then Adrian mentioned that Laura would meet him at Commonwealth Atlantic Bank the next morning to sign what he called a ceremonial letter of support for renovations at 2 Morel hotels. He had discussed it with her before. According to him, the family was arranging a short-term bridge loan while a European tax credit was processed. Laura would be listed as a future family member, but he had assured her the document carried no practical risk. "It is more symbolic than financial," he said in English. "The bank likes continuity. Our marriage demonstrates stability." I asked why a bank needed my daughter's signature to renovate hotels she did not own. Adrian gave me a patient smile. "American lenders can be cautious with foreign assets. Laura is not guaranteeing the debt. She is simply acknowledging our combined plan." Laura touched my sleeve. "Maya is going to look at the final papers later, Dad. I haven't signed anything." Maya Patel was Laura's business attorney. That answer should have eased me, but I noticed Philippe watching Adrian rather than Laura. It was the look of a man waiting to see whether a rehearsed explanation had worked. After dessert, the Morels began switching into French. It started innocently. Monique commented on the wine. Philippe made a dry joke about Virginia roads. Adrian translated just enough to maintain the performance, and I let my face remain politely blank. Then Philippe asked whether the property valuation was current. 5.2 million, Adrian replied in French. The appraisal is 14 months old, but the bank accepted it. Monique glanced at Laura, who was describing a patient program to me. "And she still believes she is signing only a letter?" "She believes the center is secondary support," Adrian said. "Tomorrow, she stops being a fiancé and becomes collateral." The sentence was so cold that for 1 second I wondered whether I had misunderstood. Then Monique answered, and all doubt disappeared. "Once the bank releases the 2.8 million, the wedding can be delayed. She will be too ashamed to tell anyone what happened." Philippe warned them not to underestimate Laura's lawyer. Adrian said Maya had not received the full packet. He planned to present the signature pages at the bank and explain that the rest contained routine corporate disclosures. Monique asked what would happen if the hotels failed anyway. "The lender comes here first," Philippe said. "The Virginia property is clean. Our hotels are not." That was when I learned the Morel Group owed more than $3.4 million, that both hotels had lost money for 3 years, and that their existing lender had refused another extension. Laura's building was not supporting a healthy renovation. It was the only unencumbered asset standing between the Morels and insolvency. Monique studied my daughter over the rim of her glass. Une femme seule qui a peur de recommencer. A lonely woman who is afraid to start over. I waited for Adrian to defend her. Instead, he looked at Laura with the same tenderness he had practiced for nearly 2 years and said, "That fear is exactly why she will sign." My hand tightened around my coffee cup. I imagined standing, repeating every word in French, and watching their faces change. The pleasure of that moment was vivid and completely useless. They would deny it. Adrian would say I had mistranslated a discussion about loan structure. Philippe would call it a joke. Monique would cry. By morning, they would have a new story in which I was an aging, possessive father frightened of losing control of his only daughter. Worse, Laura might feel forced to choose between us before she had seen proof. Love can survive a warning. It does not always survive humiliation delivered in public. So I smiled, collected the plates, and asked whether anyone wanted more coffee. When the Morels left, Adrian kissed Laura at the front door and reminded her to bring identification to the bank at 10. Philippe shook my hand and told me I had raised an exceptional daughter. Monique kissed my cheek. I could smell her rose perfume after the car had disappeared down the driveway. Laura stayed behind to help with the dishes. I nearly told her then, but she was tired and happy, moving around the kitchen where her mother had once moved. The engagement ring flashed each time she reached for a plate. I needed to speak when I could give her more than my anger. After she left, I went to the workshop. Ellen and I had made important decisions there because the scent of cut wood calmed both of us. I wrote down every French sentence I could remember, first in French and then in English. I recorded who had said it, what had been discussed immediately before it, and every number mentioned: 2.8 million, 3.4 million, 5.2 million, 14-month-old appraisal, signature pages, routine disclosures. I emailed the notes to myself so the time would be preserved. Then I called Laura and asked her to meet me at 6:30 the next morning before going anywhere else. She heard something in my voice and agreed. She arrived in work clothes with her hair still damp. I had made coffee, but neither of us drank it. I told her first that I spoke French. She blinked twice, then gave a brief laugh. Since when? Since before you were born. I lived there for 9 years. Dad, what does that have to do with Adrian? I placed my handwritten pages on the workbench and told her exactly what I had heard. I did not summarize it as a feeling. I repeated the sentences, named each speaker, and translated them as carefully as I could. When I reached Monique's description of her as a lonely woman afraid to start over, Laura's face changed. When I repeated Adrian's answer, she stepped away from the bench. No, she said. He wouldn't say that. I heard him. You could have misunderstood the financial terms. Even fluent people misunderstand legal conversations. That is possible, I said, which is why I am not asking you to end your engagement because of my translation. Her eyes filled, but she kept her voice controlled. Then what are you asking? 48 hours. Do not sign. Let Maya request the complete bank file directly, not from Adrian. Honest paperwork will defend an honest man. Laura looked at the ring on her hand. I could see her searching through 18 months of memories, testing each one against something she did not want to believe. She asked why I had stayed silent at dinner. I told her the truth. If I had confronted them, they would have made this about my French. I need it to be about your name on those documents. She sat on the stool Ellen used when she came to the workshop. For a long time, the only sound was the small heater clicking near the wall. Finally, Laura took out her phone and sent Adrian a message saying an emergency at the center required her to postpone the bank appointment. Then she called Maya. Maya did not need 48 hours to become concerned. She asked Laura to forward every document Adrian had given her. The packet contained a 4-page summary, a projected renovation budget, photographs of attractive hotel rooms, and a signature page titled Family Support Acknowledgement. The language on that page was broad enough to worry her, but it did not identify the Virginia property or describe a personal guarantee. Do not sign this, Maya said, and do not accept his statement that it is symbolic. Banks do not schedule Saturday verification appointments for symbolism. Maya contacted Commonwealth Atlantic's commercial lending office as Laura's authorized attorney. At first, the loan officer refused to discuss a confidential application. Maya supplied proof of representation and asked one narrow question. Was Laura Bennett listed as a borrower, guarantor, pledgor, or beneficial partner in any pending transaction associated with Morel Hospitality Group? The answer came from the bank's compliance department 90 minutes later. Laura was listed as all four. The Morels had submitted the application 11 days before our dinner. NBI noon. The bank had frozen the file and sent Maya a secure set of documents for Laura to verify. I watched my daughter open them at the conference table in Maya's office. The first page identified Laura as a 25% financial partner in a new American holding company she had never heard of. The second listed Bennett Mobility and Rehabilitation as a related business. The third stated that she had agreed to pledge the center's property as primary security for a $2.8 million bridge loan. At the bottom was her signature. And Laura stared at it for a long time. It looks like mine. Maya placed a blank sheet over the rest of the page, leaving only the signature visible. Looking like yours is not the same as being yours. Where might someone have obtained a clean sample? There were hundreds of possibilities. Laura signed employment agreements, vendor contracts, insurance forms, and patient partnership documents. Then she remembered a service contract Adrian had helped her review 6 months earlier when the center replaced the scheduling software. She opened the original. Even without an expert, we could see that the signature on the loan application had the same long upward stroke at the end, and the same tiny break in the first letter. Maya enlarged both images on her screen. The alignment was identical. Natural signatures vary. These did not. And the application also contained an appraisal Laura had commissioned for insurance purposes 14 months earlier. Adrian had once offered to scan a box of her records while the center changed offices. He had access to the appraisal, the service contract, and a spreadsheet showing the center's income. At the time, his help had felt like kindness. The bank file included email confirmations from an address that looked almost correct: laura.bennett@bennettmobility.com. Laura's real address contained 2 T's in Bennett. The false account had answered questions, approved the property description, and requested that bank employees communicate through Adrian because Laura was still emotionally fragile following the recent death of her mother. Ellen had been dead for 3 years. Laura read that sentence twice. The forged signature frightened her. The use of her grief enraged her. "He told them I couldn't speak for myself," she said. "He told them not to let you," Maya answered. At 1:15, Adrian called. Laura let it ring. He called again, then sent a message asking why compliance had frozen the loan. He did not ask whether she was all right. He did not ask why she had missed the appointment. His first concern was the money. Maya advised Laura to send one response: "All future communication regarding the loan must go through my attorney. Nothing more." Adrian arrived at Laura's house 40 minutes later. I was there because she had asked me to be, but I stayed in the kitchen while she met him in the living room. He began with confusion. He said his parents must have expanded the application without telling him. When Laura showed him the forged signature, confusion became sorrow. He sat down, covered his face, and said he had only been trying to save 200 employees from losing their jobs. "Did you create the email account?" Laura asked. "My father has people who handle documents." "Did you give them my appraisal?" "I may have sent it as an example of our combined strength. I never authorized anyone to forge you." "Why did you tell the bank I was too grief-stricken to speak to them?" He looked toward the kitchen, aware that I could hear. "Thomas has convinced you that every imperfect decision is a crime." That was when I stepped into the doorway. "I have not convinced her of anything. The bank showed her what you submitted." Adrian stood. His face hardened for only a moment before the softness returned. He told Laura the loan could still be repaired. He would sign a private agreement accepting all responsibility. His parents would pledge their homes. He would give Laura control of the hotel company after the wedding. Every promise grew larger as her trust became smaller. Maya joined us by video call and asked him to email the proposed agreement. He refused to put it in writing. Then Laura asked one question in a voice so quiet that he had to lean closer. "At my father's table, did you call me collateral?" Adrian glanced at me. "Your father misunderstood a technical discussion." "Did you say it? The French word has nuances." "Did you say it?" He did not answer. Laura opened the front door. By evening, Philippe had taken over. He called me directly and began in English, with the tone of a man accustomed to turning pressure into courtesy. He said families sometimes used strong language when discussing risk. He insisted no loan could close without Laura's final consent, as though an unfinished fraud were harmless. Then he warned that if I destroyed the wedding, Laura would blame me for the rest of her life. "If the truth can destroy the wedding," I told him, "then your son never brought her a marriage. He brought her a contract." Philippe's courtesy disappeared. He said I was an old carpenter interfering in transactions I did not understand. I reminded him that an old carpenter understood the difference between his daughter's signature and a copy pasted onto a loan application. He ended the call. Monique tried a different approach. She sent Laura a long message describing Adrian as a loyal son trapped by his father's financial desperation. She said he had hidden the problem because he was afraid Laura would see him as a failure. She apologized for an unfortunate translation and suggested that my French was not subtle enough to distinguish emotional exaggeration from a literal plan. I replied in French. I repeated the exact idiom she had used, including the regional expression from Lyon that she assumed I could not know. I explained the tense of Adrian's sentence and why it described a future change in Laura's legal status, not a metaphor. Then I wrote one final line. "I did not misunderstand your grammar. You misunderstood my silence." There was no response. Over the next week, The bank's fraud team reconstructed the application. The loan officer had retained emails from Adrian because he was the designated coordinator. He had personally sent the appraisal and the center's financial statements. Metadata showed that the PBF containing Laura's signature had been created on his laptop the night after he downloaded the scheduling contract she had signed. The false email address had been accessed from the same internet connection as his condominium in Washington. The most damaging email was not technical. Adrian had written to Philippe, "Laura will sign once the wedding pressure is high enough. Her father is sentimental and will not interfere." That sentence stripped away his final excuse. He had not merely known about his parents' plan. He had measured my daughter's love, her grief, and my restraint as financial variables. The bank also examined the Morel business records. Their application described the hotels as temporarily short of renovation cash after a strong season. Tax filings showed losses for 3 consecutive years. Vendor lawsuits had been omitted. An existing mortgage was listed at less than half its actual balance. The promised European tax credit had already been denied. Without Laura's property, the Morels had no qualifying collateral. Laura canceled the wedding. She did it herself, in a short email copied to the venue, the officiant, and both families. She did not accuse Adrian in public. She wrote that the engagement had ended because of financial deception and that all further communication must go through counsel. Then she removed her ring and placed it in Maya's office, safe as potential evidence of any claim about engagement expenses. The quietness of that decision did not make it easy. Grief does not disappear because the person who caused it deserves to be left. Laura mourned the man she had believed Adrian was. She questioned every tender moment. She wondered whether he had attended Ellen's memorial because he loved her or because he was studying where her loyalty lived. Some mornings she was furious. Other mornings she missed him so badly that anger felt like another kind of loss. Nee did not tell her she should have known. Intelligent people are not protected from deception by intelligence. Adrian had used patience, consistency, and care. The very qualities decent people are taught to trust. Blaming Laura would have completed his work for him. And instead, I brought food, fixed a sticking door at her house, and listened. When she asked whether I thought any part of the relationship had been real, I said I did not know. I only knew that whatever affection Adrian felt had not stopped him from treating her consent as an obstacle. Love that requires a forged signature is not made innocent by containing a few honest moments. Commonwealth Atlantic requested a formal verification meeting before closing its internal review. The bank wanted each party to answer questions on the record and offered the Morels an opportunity to explain discrepancies. Maya advised Laura to attend because the false application used her business, her property, and her identity. I went because Laura asked me to sit beside her. The meeting took place in a glass conference room at the bank's regional office. Laura and Maya sat on one side of the table. I sat beside Laura. Across from us were Adrian, Philippe, Monique, and 2 lawyers. Dana Mercer, the bank's senior compliance officer, led the meeting. She had a calm voice and 6 organized folders. People who depend on confusion should fear organized folders. Dana began with the appraisal. Philippe said Adrian had obtained it from Laura with permission. Laura said she had never authorized its use for a loan. Dana produced Adrian's email attaching the document 11 days before Laura received even the summary packet. Next came the ownership certificate declaring Laura a 25% partner in Morel Hospitality USA. Philippe blamed an outside accountant. Dana showed that the accountant had asked Adrian to confirm the percentage and that Adrian had replied, "Approved. Marriage will consolidate the interests." And then Dana displayed the false email account. Adrian claimed a junior assistant had created it to simplify communication. The bank's records showed the first login originated from his home connection at 11:43 p.m. The assistant had never accessed it. Maya placed the authentic scheduling contract and the loan application side by side. A document examiner retained by the bank had concluded that Laura's signature image was digitally extracted from the contract. Even tiny compression artifacts matched. Adrian's lawyer asked whether that proved Adrian himself had performed the copying. Dana answered by showing the creation history. The altered file came from a user profile registered to Adrian on his personal computer. Philippe interrupted. He said his son had acted under unbearable pressure to protect a historic family business. Dana reminded him that financial pressure did not authorize false statements. She turned to the undeclared $3.4 million debt, the vendor judgments, and the denied tax credit. Philippe blamed poor translations between French and American accounting standards. Debt does not change meaning when it crosses the Atlantic, Maya said. Monique began crying. She told Laura that hundreds of livelihoods depended on the hotels, and asked whether one mistake on paper should destroy generations of work. Laura listened without interrupting. Then she asked Dana to show the email about wedding pressure. Dana read it aloud. Laura will sign once the wedding pressure is high enough. Her father is sentimental and will not interfere. The room became very still. Laura removed the engagement ring from the small evidence envelope Maya had brought and placed it on top of the loan packet. "You did not ask me to help your family," she said to Adrian. "You secretly volunteered my mother's life work to pay your family's debts." Adrian leaned forward. "I knew the hotels would recover. I never believed you would lose the center." "Then why did you hide the risk?" "Because you would have said no before you understood what was at stake." "That was my right." He said they could still marry after the investigation. He called the forgery a mistake made in panic, a paper shortcut that had gone too far. Laura shook her head. "A mistake is putting the wrong date on a form. You copied my signature, invented my consent, and called my grief a business advantage." For the first time since I had met him, Adrian had no prepared expression. He looked younger, not because he was innocent, but because the polished man had fallen away and left someone who had always expected another person to absorb the cost of his fear. Dana ended the meeting by stating that the bank would not fund the loan and would refer the file to its financial crimes unit and the appropriate authorities. The Morels' lawyers asked for a private discussion. Laura stood. She had answered every question required of her. As we reached the door, Philippe turned toward Monique and muttered in French, "The old man has ruined everything." I stopped and answered in French, "No, your son ruined everything when he decided my daughter's trust was worth less than your debt." Philippe's face lost its color. And he switched to English, so no one in the room could pretend not to understand. "I heard you clearly at dinner. The documents simply proved he translated you correctly." There was no triumph in saying it. I had imagined that moment the night of the dinner, but reality felt different. My daughter had lost the future she thought she was entering. 2 hotels were likely to fail. Employees who had not forged anything would face uncertainty. Justice can be necessary without being joyful. The investigation lasted months. Commonwealth Atlantic permanently rejected the application and removed every reference linking Laura or the center to Morel Hospitality. The county land records confirmed that no lien or deed of trust had been recorded against her property. Maya obtained written assurances from the bank and the title insurer, then filed a civil action to recover Laura's legal costs and prevent further use of her identity or business records. Adrian was investigated for identity fraud, attempted bank fraud, and forgery-related offenses. Philippe and Monique faced scrutiny for false financial statements and their roles in the application. I did not ask prosecutors for a particular punishment, and Laura did not use the press to shame them. We provided documents, answered questions, and let the process move at its own pace. The Morel hotels entered court-supervised restructuring after their lenders refused further extensions. One property was sold. The other remained open under independent management while creditors negotiated. Adrian later sent Laura a 12-page letter. Most of it described pressure, family duty, and his certainty that he could have repaid the loan before any harm reached her. Only near the end did he write, "I should not have used your signature." Laura returned the letter to Maya and did not respond. An apology that spends 11 pages explaining the offender and 1 sentence naming the victim's loss is still an argument. In 6 months after the bank meeting, Laura invited me to the center for the launch of a new program. She called it Clear Consent. It offered free monthly workshops for older adults, family caregivers, and small business owners on recognizing financial coercion, checking property records, protecting electronic signatures, and demanding independent review before guaranteeing another person's debt. Maya volunteered at the first session. Dana sent educational materials from the bank. And Laura opened the workshop by telling the audience that abuse rarely begins with a stranger demanding a password. Sometimes it begins with someone helpful offering to handle paperwork. Sometimes it arrives as urgency, loyalty, romance, or a promise that a signature is only symbolic. She did not tell her entire story. She did not need to. The authority in her voice came from having survived the moment when trust was used against her and refusing to let shame keep it secret. And afterward, we stood beneath the maple trees Ellen had planted outside the center. Laura asked why I had never told her I spoke French. And he did, I said. You were 8. And he frowned. I would remember that. And you asked whether I could order ice cream in French. When I said yes, you decided that was the only useful part. Nisha laughed. A real laugh. The first one I had heard from her in weeks. Then she grew quiet and thanked me. For saving me, she said. And he shook my head. I did not save you. I heard something and gave you time to look. You asked the questions. You faced the answers. You walked out of that room. Nisha considered that, then nodded. Thank you for not choosing for me. That mattered more. NIM parents sometimes imagine protection as standing between a child and every painful thing. But an adult daughter is not a possession to be guarded by one man from another. If I had ordered Laura to cancel the wedding, I would have used love to take away her choice. A gentler version of the same disrespect that made Adrian think he could sign her name. My responsibility was to tell her what I knew, help her reach the evidence, and remain beside her while she decided what it meant. I still work in my shop. Laura still runs the center. The blue gardening gloves remain in the mudroom, though I finally moved Ellen's chair closer to the window. Some losses do not resolve. They become part of the room, and we learn to live without arranging our whole lives around the empty space. The Morels believed French gave them a locked room where they could speak without consequences. But language was never the reason their plan failed. It only opened the door. What ended them was the evidence waiting on the other side, and a daughter strong enough to walk through it.